Okay, wonderful. Welcome everyone to another Working Wednesday. My name is Lizzie Gray and I'm a project coordinator for Connected Lane County. We are more than halfway through our fall webinar series where we dissect 10 of the New World of Work's top 10 professional skills. And today we're actually going to be exploring 2 of them, social diversity and empathy. Joining me in that quest are 2 professionals from the local community. I will go ahead and let you both introduce yourselves. Rebecca, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Hi, my name is Rebecca Sprinson and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I currently work at the University of Oregon in the Lundquist College of Business, where my role is to design new programs to help students plan for their careers, get connected with opportunities to explore different career paths on the ground, so internships, networking. I like to say that I'm the place where like really crazy ideas about new programs come to take flight. So that's how I keep my job interesting for me. I have a background here in Eugene as a fundraiser. I worked in the public schools with 4J and in business development. So I've been all over the place.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Leah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I am Leah Dunbar. I teach at Churchill High School part-time here in Eugene, Oregon. And then I also work part-time as a specialist at Lane ESD with Lizzie. Which has been a new role for me as a curriculum specialist. But the course I teach at Churchill High School, which I believe is probably why you invited me here, Lizzie, is called Courageous Conversations. And it's an ethnic studies class where we look at all different aspects of identity and how they intersect and interact and shape our sense of self and how we move through the world.
It's incredible. Thank you, Leah. So just so everyone knows, we are expecting one more panelist, Eric Richardson of the NAACP. So if he joins us, we'll go ahead and bring him in and let him introduce himself. But without further ado, I say we get started just as the 3 of us. Okay, so my very first question is starting off with a quick clarification. And Rebecca, I will aim this question at you. Can you tell us what the difference between empathy and sympathy is?
I feel like this is a test and just hitting me really hard right off the bat. Yeah, so I can try and I hope Leah will chime in with clarifications and improvements. So the way I think about it is sympathy is sort of like looking outside of yourself at another person and sort of assessing what you see their emotional experience to be. And, you know, perhaps saying, oh, I'm sorry, or that's too bad. And that empathy is trying as much as possible. And I think I would think of empathy as sort of a journey and not a destination emotionally. So trying to come to a place where within your own personal experience, you can draw connections between what you know of your, oh, look who's coming, what you know of your own emotional experience and how that allows you to relate more closely to that other person's experience. Oh my God, help me.
Snaps.
Okay, good. Snaps. I'm here for it.
I've given you snaps for that, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Go
ahead, please.
I was just going to say, I think that was such a beautiful way to distinguish two concepts that actually are different but seem very similar. And a lot of people, I think, confuse the two. And there's a lot of memes out there that I don't think are helping the situation when it comes to empathy and sympathy. But, you know, the way that I think of empathy is about, I mean, like that's what we're doing in my classes is like we're sharing our stories. And so even though my story isn't the same as yours, right, I'm gaining an understanding of what it may like to may be like to be you. And that's actually an experience that I can't share, but I can understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you share what some of the memes are that you're seeing that might be inaccurate?
Well, I think that we're just kind of in this moment, and it's probably because of the pandemic is really helping. Where of course, we're taking in more social media. People are more reflective in more reflective spaces. And so there's a lot of like, kind of like, am I an empath? And I mean, have you seen the am I an empath memes out there? And, or maybe it's just that everyone in my social media feed identifies as an empath. But, that identity is maybe not the most, it's actually not the most common, or it's not as common, I think, as people think. And I don't think it means what people think it means. About like, I feel everyone's feelings. That's not what empathy is. Sympathy is that, because it's like I can identify with the universal experience of loss, of grief, right, of joy. That's that sympathy, the same, right? Whereas the empathy piece is like, that's not like I'm feeling what you're feeling right now. It's I'm listening to you right now so that hopefully I can start to understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling.
That's great. Thank you, Leah. No, that was a great team effort on that one. Absolutely. Eric, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, sorry. I'll turn on my video just a hot second. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Do you want me to give you a minute before I ask you to introduce yourself?
Well. Okay, I'm cool. Here I go. I was just trying to get set up.
No, absolutely. Wonderful. Hi.
Hello.
Great to see you. So on the call, we have Rebecca Sprinson with the U of O, and Leah Dunbar, who I know that you know because she texted you. And we have students tuning in from all over Lane County high schools. Eric, would you like to introduce yourself formally to the group?
Yes, good afternoon. So my name is Eric Richardson. I am the executive director of the Eugene Springfield branch of the NAACP. And that, just to be clear, is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We've been around since 1909 as an organization.
Very great. Thank you for joining us. So I'm actually going to hop over to the next question. And I will actually, Eric, if you're ready, I'll give this one to you to start out with. Being that I know that you are a leader within your organization. How do you know when to respond to either clients or your team members with empathy versus sympathy?
Well, I think, for me, it's about breaking down the barriers. And so that question kind of is an example of barriers, because you're asking me the difference between sympathy and empathy, and how I would look at that in any particular situation. And so in my particular instance, I would not really look at that, because I believe that to have empathy, sympathy is a part of the process. And so once you are committed to having an empathetic approach, then it's all inclusive.
Great, very nice. Anything, Leah or Rebecca, that you would like to add to that?
Ooh, I was really enjoying the way that you connected both sympathy and empathy. But what I was thinking about I'm in a school right now, right? As are the students who are watching. And, one of the issues that all schools across the United States are wrestling with right now is, the understanding of why people are taking to the streets, right? Why are we in this moment of social unrest now? Like, what, in what ways is this moment different than, the 1960s or the 1970s or, you know, any earlier moments of transformation. And I do think that it's really important to distinguish that some people's experience is not shared by other people. And, you know, so that is the sympathy leading to empathy piece that I think is also lending itself to our increased awareness of Black Lives Matter in this moment, to be specific, right? And just that understanding that, wait, just because I haven't experienced this myself does not make it not real. And so we're having those conversations in my classes, and then of course as a school and as a system. And so I just want to just say that I appreciate that connection that you just made, Eric, because I think that, I mean, I know that as a community at church, I mean, we're dealing with that as a community right now.
I did want to acknowledge what you said in that the difference, if you're looking at sympathy and empathy, when you were looking at white supremacy, for instance, or, you know, is that one can be sympathetic without changing their narrative of what it is they're talking about. But, you know, they don't have to, you know, they can think whatever they want to, but they can take the high road, so to speak, and be sympathetic. Whereas empathy really is the component of actually study in some way. You have to understand what it is that's going on, and then you have a better sense of empathy for the situation. And so, you know, in the person. So there is those differences in application.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So I actually have a follow-up question that I'm curious about too, which is, I sort of get the sense from what both of you have said, and I'm just putting this together now in my mind, that one of the actual like powerful attributes of empathy is the capacity to recognize the difference. That, like, for example, I as a white person can't fully understand personally the experience of a person of color or a Black person, especially, well, right now / at any time. And that being able to acknowledge that limitation is a component of sort of the process of developing empathy. Do you think? Does that make any sense?
Do you want to field that one, Eric? Okay, because
Well,
I'm thinking that, I mean, and this can go for all aspects of identity, and there's so many facets of our identities, but that intellectual humility piece, absolutely 100% is essential. So yes, right? Because we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
And, you know, but we do have to be aware that our embodiment only gives us so much awareness, right? How we're moving through the world only gives us that particular slice of understanding, right? And it doesn't mean that we can access necessarily other
That was so much better articulated.
I don't think so, but I really liked what you said.
Yeah, you have to forgive me there, because it's very, we're here on this conversation. I'm really happy to be doing it, but I'm also, we have this Zoom on this, you know, in our account, and there in Buena Vista Elementary School is having a meeting that's been going on with their like a BSU type of thing, and they're meeting right now. So I'm kind of letting people in. So I was spacing there for a hot second, so I apologize.
Don't worry about it.
You're fine. Luckily, Leah was there to take that question. Not a big deal at all. So I have a question that also relates to empathy and leadership. What do you think empathy has to do with being a good leader or employee if you're not in a leadership role currently?
Yeah, well, you know, I'll take that because I've had like conversations before when we talk about like government structures, our structures such as a school board or, you know, a school district. These are structures that are set up for a purpose. And these purposes really have to do with human beings and how we work. And so the whole idea of empathy, I think, is very much needed when you have structures that are meant to do good, and that you have to have leadership that understands that relationship between the structures of power and the structures they work, and their interaction with them and their ability to direct them. And so I think, so empathy is very important when it comes to relationships, or when it comes to making plans that have to do with organizing our other people's lives.
That's a great answer. Rebecca or Leah, I'd like to give you the opportunity to respond as well.
Yeah, I don't necessarily have like a great answer, but just musing, you know, I work in the business school at the U of O, which I would describe as a pretty like typically hierarchical system, right? Like, yes, it's higher ed, but, and we like to imagine that we're very progressive and doing things differently and breaking down barriers, but yeah, you know, let's be real. And so I feel like I have a lot of time to contemplate leadership above me in particular, that, and the limits that may be present in a hierarchical system that are reinforced when you choose not to sort of access your empathy or engage with your empathy. So, you know, I appreciated Leah was describing that you've been having conversations a lot at Churchill about current social unrest and Black Lives Matter. And that's something that has come up in my office quite significantly as well in the last 4 or 5 months. And it's really interesting to watch leadership in particular navigate conversations about this when there are people whom they lead who have a personal lived experience of Blackness, and the leaders don't, and sort of how that you know, that you can choose to step into a really an uncomfortable and good place as a leader, I think, to support your employees, to support the people who look to you for leadership. And I think doing so as a leader is really powerful because all eyes are on you, and you can also really choose not to. And in choosing not to, probably you can protect yourself from change.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Well,
something I'm aware of in my own very like hierarchical work environment now.
do you feel like that is the norm, or that people are trying to protect themselves from change as administrators, educators?
I would say yes. That's my experience.
Mm-hmm.
That self-protection is pretty paramount. You know, particularly when not being self-protective means coming to terms with your complicity with white supremacy. That's, you know, I'm not going to say that that's easy. And yeah, I would say that there's a pretty good self-protective thing.
Yeah, and of course, if that is the case, then any curriculum that might be presented, that even though it may be true, even though it may be able to alleviate people's distrust and whatnot, is not accepted, not because it's relevant, but because we don't want to have a deep self-examination of what it is we're talking about. And if we don't do that, then we will continue to have the type of leadership that we've had recently, because it feeds on the unspoken piece around, you know, white supremacy. You said it, you know, and I think that, and this is so, it's very interesting now that we get to this point, because when we talk about empathy, because me as a Black man has to, I believe, as an educator or someone who's trying to do good work in our society, has to have empathy for the condition of white people in the world. And then believe, and not only do I have to have empathy for it, I have to have try to understand it. And believe me, 400 years ago, there was an African in America looking at white people, trying to understand them and why and what is going on. And here we are 400 years later, and we can't really have the deeper conversations around race, because ultimately people are it's hard to have like the man in the mirror, like Michael Jackson was talking about.
Yeah.
Very difficult to have that conversation.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And I think, Rebecca, that's when the self-preservation or the self-protection comes in, because I think people fear what's uncomfortable for them. Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to add, though, that that's not even good leadership, right? Like, we know that, I mean, I know because I'm having this experience being in a classroom by myself that, you know, it's not a dynamic space right now, because the energy and the learning and the growth and the thinking requires that I'm engaging with people who are not like me. And that's where the learning and the growth happens. And, you know, and the same, I know that there are studies that demonstrate this, right? In organizations that are more diverse, their productivity is greater, right? Because they have multiple perspectives weighing in on, you know, on their shared problems. You know, those are more innovative environments. And so what we have that I know that you're, you know, referencing, right, are these institutions that are stagnant, that aren't responding to, you know, their constituencies, and it's self-defeating. You know, it's not good leadership. Like, if I was a teacher and I wasn't listening to the voices of my students, that's not good leadership. Any company that isn't responding to the needs of its employees aren't going to have those employees for very long, unless they're in an extremely exploitative system, which, you know, arguably we are in. But, you know, if they had other options, they would leave, right? And so I think that we just really need to understand that, like, good leadership is responsive leadership, right? It is empathetic leadership. And people are, I think as it's not just I mean, it's not even just this nation. I just think collectively, the more connected that we are globally, the more we are not really down with that type of leadership. These old dinosaurs have to go. With love.
Thanks, Leah. So we actually have a question here in the chat box, and I think it's a fabulous question for whomever. What do you recommend for youth struggling at school with a teacher, or youth in a job with a supervisor who is not being supportive or inclusive about their identities? And I'll give you just a minute to let that sink in. Wonderful question.
Well, yeah. Well, the NAACP, in a lot of ways, you know, we're a very conservative organization. And so the first thing we would ask is that you just look for the appropriate channels that you would do that. So at school, or, you know, there's going to be counselors or whoever you need to talk to who are there, people you trust at the school, and let them know. And so, and then the same thing with any work situation. There are appropriate channels to go through that way. Now, you know, going beyond that, you know, as youth, I would keep it in that situation, and, you know, with your parents, you know, just communicate. Open communication is the best way to make sure you'll find the right avenues.
I want to add to that, as somebody who does live in school forever, it feels like. I've been at Churchill for 20 years. And, you know, like, we have to acknowledge the reality that sometimes the appropriate channels are not moderated or stewarded by the appropriate people.
Yes.
And so, you know, that's where, this is actually where I thought you were going a little bit with that, Eric, is, I mean, that's where you find the advocacy organizations in the community, or you seek out folks that you know that have pushed on the institution in ways that it needs to respond, so that everybody is supported and included, right, and feels safe. And so there's lots of examples that we can look to, you know, for communities that had to go outside of those channels for those channels to exist, right? So, I mean, because they weren't always there before. And so, you know, we know who our safe people are. In a school, because I'm in school, you know who the safe people are. But if you're not finding the safe people, then sometimes you have to do a little bit of, you know, going around and organizing to create safety for other people.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's when, you know, the more inclusive environments we create, the more people, that it's the umbrella, right? The more people fit underneath there and are safe in our schools. And that's, you know, we can't learn if we're not safe, right? We can't contribute positively if we're not feeling safe. You know, schools have to be a safe space for all students.
Yeah. And I agree. And I wanted to back that up, because the safety part is very important when it comes to just interaction and making sure that folks are going to be there. But I think it also goes back to the leadership aspect, is that, you know, again, if something is happening in one school, then the principals should be very concerned, because hopefully and ideally this person is there to work through those things. And we have agreements and understanding around education, and leadership is similar to what we're seeing at the national level. There needs to be separation between one's mission in some way. So education shouldn't be political. You know, it's about an agreement of those things that are healthy for growth for our children and our society. You know, and so that obviously means how we treat one another, and how we are safe we feel in our public settings. Mm-hmm. You know, and so I think that safety is, and feeling like if you're a person of color, that ultimately my goal would be that they would feel safe going to the principal's office and being heard, or going to anywhere within the structure that is being funded by taxpayer dollars, with a history of the United States that is based on these words of equality that the NAACP, like I said, has been looking after, trying to get to that point for 112 years. So the whole idea is that this isn't something that we're reinventing. These are obligations that have not been met. And we need to have safety, and we need folks to understand what it looks like, so that all people are feeling safe in response to, you know, if you want, you know, trauma, you know, that has happened for our poor folk, you know, for people who have gone through all kinds of things, and now are in our public institutions and looking for leadership and that type of thing. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lizzie?
Yeah, of course.
Which is, I also think that particularly right now, there's such a strong emphasis on constantly being in action against oppression. and both personal oppression and like the oppression of others around us. And I mean, action is what will bring us change. Absolutely. I'm not at all condoning like inaction. And there also needs to be rest, right? And room for self-preservation. You know, if you take this question, which is about what a youth might experience in school or in a workplace, pushing is really hard. And I just want to acknowledge that, and that like sometimes you have to take a break from pushing, either you know, for your own personal situation or to change systems. And the break is as important as the pushing, right? And so I just want to really acknowledge like that's okay. And then part of taking a break, I think also is like finding the people around you who will be a refuge, even if they aren't the people who can create change on your behalf or who are in positions of power. You know, having people with whom you can share your story, simply to share it and to acknowledge its existence and its truth, you know, is so important as well. And because there will not always be an administrator who will help you, and your boss will not always look out for you and be willing to change. And the dean of your school may not really be ready to like look at their white supremacy and those things. Like, I can't make that person change, right? I'm in control of what I can show them. And a student, a young person, and any person has to also look out for what it means to rest and to
take care of themselves. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's beautifully put. Thank you. Thank you for making that note. And that actually ties in really nicely to the student's follow-up question. How can youth who have more privileged identities support their peers when they see their peers being treated differently because of their identities? And I think acting as a refuge for those friends is an awesome example. And I'm curious if anybody has any more.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, the main thing is to be informed, you know, to know about history, you know, to be an active participant in what's happening in the moment, but to actually be someone who actually tries to be informed about what's going on, people's relationships historically, what are possibilities together as citizens and residents of this nation, and how we can work together civically doing this work. And so I think that it's beyond, we shouldn't just boil everything down to, oh, we need to deal with this racial thing, because that's part of what I've been saying, that part of what we do is the self-reflection part, is that we have to, as a people, when I say a people in the United States of America, we need to reflect. And it's not just that Black Lives Matter, is that Black lives and the American identity and the American story and the American destiny are tied up since the first African was brought here before 1619, you know, and we're still feeling that effect. And it's really just about, we are not able to feel like a family. And so I think we need to, and that goes back to safety. We have to have an intention that what we are doing, what we are creating is for safety matter. We vote for safety in a way because sense, intelligence, you know, our tradition, what would grandma say? The things that matter most. We need to understand that those things were meant for all people, and we have to apply them equally, so to speak, by giving people their dignity and equality. But you have to actually know what that is. You know, I actually have a pretty good knowledge of continental Europe and some of the different nations And if you go back 1,000 years, that some of the different tribal affiliations, if you will, in Europe, you know, how many people can say that about Africa? And then having an appreciation of it and understanding the music that comes there. All of us know about Bach and Beethoven, but there are musicians from Mali and traditions from Africa that still exist to this day. And so so there needs to be just an appreciation, an exchange. I mean, it's 2020. Mm-hmm. Multiculturalism, diversity, you know, these things are important.
I want to add to that, Eric, because I love that you were using 2020 in a positive framing, first of all, which we're not seeing a lot of recently. Yeah, and then the other piece is, you know, about learning about other people's experience, their ancestry, their traditions, and going deeper than like the sanctioned or dominant culture version, right, that has been provided for us. And a piece of that, when I'm just meditating on this question about supporting people who are maybe in identities that are more marginalized than yours, right? Like understanding how your own privilege operates, understanding how that situates you differently than the folks that you are in sympathy, but hopefully moving to a place of empathy with, right? By learning about them. And then there's that whole concept of nothing about us without us, right? Like, you know, if we want to help other people, we have to be in relationship with other people. We have to listen when they are telling us their stories and sharing with us what they need. We're not the ones deciding what it is that they need, right? And I think that one thing that we are sadly lacking in our schools, but I think that we're starting to see, at least in the adult circles that I'm kind of aware of, is, you know, like folks who are white need spaces where they can work through and unpack their whiteness and what that means and how it shows up. And students need also that opportunity to do that work so that they can then move into being and doing that solidarity coalition building work with other students across identities, right? Because this ultimately is about anti-oppressive practice. It's not just specifically about anti-racist practice or, you know, anti-homophobia or transphobia or all the isms. Like, this is how do we as communities build relationship across identities, right? Our social identities, these things that separate us, these things that have been used to create hierarchy, power, and powerlessness, right? Like, how do we start to really root that stuff out so that people can show up in their fabulous selves, right? And we can really start to like do the thing that we're supposed to be doing right now, which is being good humans. So.
Thank you.
2020.
Love it. So this next question is kind of it's a tough one. So I don't want to direct this at anyone in particular. I would love if somebody wanted to volunteer to answer it if you do have an answer. But can you think of a time when you leveraged social and or cultural differences to generate new ideas or to redefine a social norm in your world, in your community? And I'll give you just.
It's kind of funny. I don't know what you got there, Leah.
I see her wheels turning.
I really love the question, you know, and I'm just thinking like you have to think about your identities, right? Like all of the identities that we occupy, you know, and I'm a Black biracial woman, right? And so there are certain moments when, you know, my different identities give me some leverage or they disadvantage me, right? And in different spaces. So I'm not really answering the question. I'm thinking about how that question works for me. Yeah, I'm an identical twin, you know, and so like I'm moving through the world, I feel like, you know, differently than somebody who is a singleton, you know, I've called them, right? Who, you know, never had to like kind of navigate as somebody who shared a womb, who always felt like this intense connection with another human being in a body outside of my own body, but I thought we were the same body until we were like 3 or 4, you know? And so it's like there's all these different layers of difference that you have to think about. How do I leverage those identities in different spaces? Well, if I'm a twin and I have twins in the room, like those are folks that know what it's like to always be called out your name your whole life, you know, and yet that's okay, right? Because you have to start to read people's intention, like beneath the words, you know. And I, you know, because she was a teacher too, I've been picked up and hugged and, you know, all, and even been mad at, you know, and it wasn't even me, you know, so, yeah, I'm just thinking that's not an answer. That's
no, I like it.
I was wondering if you could just repeat it, because I wrote down something. I want to make sure it kind of matches up here.
Yeah, the question, would you like me to repeat? Yeah,
Yes,
absolutely. Can you think of a time when you leveraged social and or cultural differences to generate new ideas or redefine a social norm?
I can give like what I think might be a sort of very practical answer that we can wrap our hands around. You know, so I work in career services in the business school. So this is a place that is very concerned with helping students navigate the process of becoming productive, employed members of society. All of those terms are pretty abhorrent if you want to unpack them at a later date. So we could go into that maybe on a different webinar. But one of the things that I think until really recently, at least in our business school and within our career services world, was totally taken for granted was the idea of professionalism and what that means. And professionalism usually means, if we unpack sort of beyond what the dictionary would say about it, it means certain behaviors and ways of appearing in the world that are condoned by people in power, right? Like, does that resonate with Leah and Eric? Maybe nods, snaps. And what it doesn't mean is, like, to use an example that's very common now and probably people have heard, like having natural hair as a Black woman in the workplace. And so I think there have been conversations within my collegial circle about how do we, like, is it relevant still to talk about like having professionalism as an attribute if it's laden with all of these meanings that are totally exclusionary, that are about like being white and having straight hair and, you know, very embodied ways of being in the world that we can't and shouldn't change. And so I think that's a good example, just that when we allow like the voices, say on the topic of natural hair, to talk about, whoa, like you want me to press my hair to be professional, like what does straightening and damaging my hair have to do with how I appear in the world as a professional? That allows us to actually totally explode the idea of professionalism beyond just that question of hair, right? But it's an amazing entry point into a conversation that, number one, should absolutely be about, you know, how you appear in the workplace and whether it really matters if you're wearing pajama bottoms on this Zoom call, or what it really means to be professional. Like, what does it mean to show up that way? And is that idea even valuable anymore?
So I would, you know, to me, I think that's going a little bit extreme. You know what I'm saying? Because
The pajama pants part, or?
The piece about, well, no, the extreme part is like, does it matter at all if we have a dress code, so to speak, of any way, of any type? You can just come dress as you want, or you can come ungroomed, so to speak, right? And you can just show up and it's okay. I think that nowhere in the world would that be agreed with, and I don't believe that certain things, I almost feel like there are certain concepts, such as professionalism, that in order for me to say that is owned by white people, is to say that white people own professionalism, and in the whole concept. And I don't believe it. And it is part of, so if that whole concept originated, is owned, is practiced only really by white people in its purest form, then what is it that we don't have a word for it? Professional non-whites do for the last thousands of years all over the world. And what is professional? And so I think, but that's just responding to your question and that word professional. So it's very interesting. But going back, what I was thinking about when you talk about identity and leveraging something, I think that we also, like I said, don't dig too deep into that identity, because really, right now, folks going to school, learning your profession, interacting in society, your identity really becomes your skill set and your talent, your educational pursuits, your integrity around those things. And I think that ultimately, you can say that, well, I'm this and I'm that, whatever the racial issue is. And I don't believe that that gives you a certain, like, that you can't apply equity to your skill set, your pursuit of excellence. Excellence doesn't change because of your racial attributes. And so what excellence, professionalism, what are we talking about? And so does excellence not apply? And I think so we're talking about definitions, and we're talking and who we're applying certain definitions to as well. But I think that as far as identity, when I thought about leveraging something, I thought it was more my talents and my pursuit as it related to my identity, such as my understanding of jazz music and how I would bring that into an educational format to talk about identity and different things like that. So really it became more about the talent or educational pursuit as identity.
Thank you. Leah, would you like to tell the group what you just added to the chat?
Yeah, I just added an article linking, it's an article about a piece that was written by Tima Okun and Keith Jones, which maybe some people have seen, and it was about, I think it's called The Characteristics of White Supremacist Professional Working Cultures or something. I'm paraphrasing, it's not perfect. But I linked this article because it's a little bit less academic-y. But I do think that, I really appreciate, Rebecca, what you were bringing forward there. And I don't think it's about that folks from all identities aren't professional. It's who decides what professionalism looks like. And up until recently, it's only been a certain Eurocentric definition of what professionalism is. And so I just wanted to add that article into the chat because I don't read that, that my showing up, like my hair, like I used to, it's like I have this crazy wild hair that I used to straighten because I was part, and I am part of breathing this toxic air, right, of white supremacy that we don't notice is there until somebody's like, hey, wait a second, like why would you do that? And I'm not going to say that my hair doesn't look great straight, but it doesn't actually, because it looks like, anyway, it doesn't. But and that people shouldn't have the right to straighten their hair. Like, that's the thing to me about feminism or anti-racism or whatever, is I get to decide what that means for me. The culture doesn't get to decide what professionalism looks like. I get to decide how to show up and what that means to me. And hopefully it corresponds in the, with the values of the space where I'm seeking to be. Right. And, so I just feel like, we have to think a little, I don't know. But at the same time, I just want to leverage my identity just a little bit because I have this hair, which I can straighten very easily. And because it has a certain texture, so even as a Black biracial woman, I need to be aware of the privilege with which I'm moving because I'm a light-skinned Black woman. And so sometimes I need to step back and get off the mic and acknowledge that other people have an experience. My dad, for example, has an experience of racism that I will not, that I don't share, even though I listen, right, with empathy. I hope, my whole life, 48 years, I've had the honor of listening to his stories, but his experiences as a Black man, a darker skinned Black man, my experiences as a Black biracial woman, light-skinned biracial woman, and they are two different experiences, and I have access to different experiences because of that. And so that's where I would leverage, I think, some of my identities to expand access to other people.
Thank you, Leah. I have a follow-up question that's kind of in the same vein as professionalism. Because I often hear, while we're speaking of empathy, I often hear to leave your emotions out of the workplace. It's not professional. But at its core, empathy is an emotion. And so I guess I ask you, and I kind of want to add something to this question, how do you balance listening to your emotions enough to be empathetic without leading with emotion? And my follow-up is, do we need to balance that? Does that balance need to exist, or yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts?
First of all, whose quote is that? Who said that?
Oh, I feel like I've heard that so much.
Right. And I think that, to me, it recalls as an African American, and I just think about work in America, and I think about that saying, "We leave emotion out of the workplace." That's probably what the slave driver had to tell itself every day. That's probably what, anybody interacting with their folks had to leave that out. This isn't about emotion because these people, it's not an emotional agreement. So that whole sentiment is a way of getting people to agree to a system that doesn't make sense. And I just want to say that white supremacy, even though many people look at the people who are harmed by it as the folks that are put upon by it, but actually white supremacy over generations has harmed white people and children by telling them to take the emotional piece out of it, because we got a system here that works.
So incredibly well said. Incredibly well said. Leah or Rebecca, anything to add? I do think this will be our last question.
I just want to say quickly, and then over to you, Rebecca, that just to acknowledge that is so important, that we're all being exposed to, incredible, to violence every day on our phones, and we are impacted. We are impacted when other people suffer, even as maybe we're socialized to not feel empathy for those people. Like, that's part of the project, right, of white supremacy. That's what racism, well, race too, right, because there really is no such thing as race. But what racism does is it creates this illusion of other, right, that you are not like me. And so when somebody is inflicting torture, rape, violence upon you, I don't identify with you. right? But the reality, and that's what you just said, Eric, is like, we're all being impacted by this, and it's doing harm to every single one of us, you know. And, you know, when we're socialized as children to dissociate from that violence, like, that's harmful. That causes harm. And so, so yeah, I just appreciated your response to that.
Ditto. Okay, so I think I might wrap us up. That was the fastest hour of my life. I posted a lot of these and this one flew by. I do want to ask the students who are on this call if this has been a courageous conversation, Leah, to take your course name. So if there's anyone on the call who has questions who did not feel comfortable putting them in the chat box, please, please, please email me or Olivia, who's been corresponding with you. Please email us your questions, and I would love to get it to that question to our panelists for them to answer on the side. So I will leave us with that. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us. I really appreciated this conversation.
All right. Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Leah. All right. And thank you. All
Bye.
right.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye. See you guys.
Bye.